Hello YouTube, and hello Bossman103. This is Kirkova again. I'm getting ready to respond to your most recent video, and I thought I would make a treat of it by indulging a nice, refreshing, and healthy before bedtime snack of applesauce. With the cinnamon mixed in, that's the good stuff, and a nice dry champagne. So, in reference to your earlier comment about using God as a verb rather than a noun, you explained, I use it as a word for how we see it, not necessarily how it sees itself. Okay. I'm still not really sure I understand, but it doesn't seem like this is going to be a sticking point for us anytime soon. So, if we ever get to the point where this is really causing a problem for us, then we can worry about maybe getting that across better. But for now, it doesn't seem to be getting in the way. I think we can pretty well move on without worrying too much more about that. This belief opinion business. Okay, I don't want to argue about definitions, and I don't want to quibble about what one dictionary says or another. But how about this? This is a proposal instead of an argument. How about, for the purposes of our conversation, we just choose between the two of ourselves to draw a distinction between things that are believed to be correct about the world and things that are more clearly opinions, like political opinions or matters of taste. Because if we don't agree on some kind of distinction there, how we use our terms, there's danger of misunderstanding and of equivocation, on the other hand. And I don't want either of us to have to worry about that. So I propose that going forward from this point, when I say the word belief, I'm talking specifically about something that is held to be true and correct by an individual, and that is not subject to the whims of emotion or oughts. Okay, here's a better way of saying it. I see beliefs as pertaining to what is. I see opinions as pertaining to what ought. And that's how I use the words. I feel pretty confident that that's how a lot of people use the words, but whether it is or not, I would like to know if you would be willing to agree to use them that way for the purpose of this debate, so that going forward we can be very confident that we're saying what we mean. Because I don't want this to be about word games. Now you ask what it would take to convince me. And because in the previous video you asked what sort of belief in God would be reasonable, and I don't think I quite understood the question the way you meant it. And I don't mean to say that there's nothing that would convince me. That's not the case. The sort of Narnia Lord of the Rings example that I gave does kind of get at what would convince me, but having reworded your question, I see it differently now, so I'll answer it differently. And there's a few things. Let me just to get this out of the way. Let me give you some of the more specific problems I have with theisms generally, as they exist in our culture today. Here's something that would be really nice to see. If there was a religious text from a pre-scientific culture, and most of the main religious texts for the monotheisms we have today are from the Bronze Age or earlier, if it was totally consistent, ethically intuitive, and never required ad hoc justification, that would be extremely persuasive. If it was clear and unambiguous, and not lending itself to schisms and inquisitions, this would not be enough to make me necessarily convert. It would at least be refreshing to see, because, I mean, I could pick on Christianity, but I won't. So I'll just try to keep this generally applicable to theisms as we see them. The holy books are not totally consistent, and none of them are. And I hope this doesn't become a debate about that. I don't foresee that being a problem with you, Bossman. You don't seem like the kind of person who would take this down that road. And from what I've seen, you're seem like a smart and well-intentioned enough sort of chap that even if it does go that way, I'm sure you're not going to be doing it in the kind of petty way that I've seen people do it before. But what I'm getting is, I hope we're not going to have an argument about, oh, the Bible is totally consistent. I maintain that it's not. I'm prepared to defend that assertion if I really have to, but that is a tiresome enterprise that always seems to go around in circles, and I don't want to commit myself to doing that right now. If it was ethically intuitive, that is to say, if everything that it told us to do seemed right, or at least not wrong, if a religion is true, then I should never, as an adherent in the act of living it out, feel that something it was telling me to do was wrong. I should never have that feeling if a religion is true. It never requires ad hoc justification. None of its myths should be the sort of thing that would one day be challenged by scientific discovery. I'm not necessarily talking... here's the thing. I'm just going to use Christianity as an example because it's the one, that I'm most familiar with because I was Christian once. I'll get into that later. I'm not picking on it. This is true of all of them, but take the Adam and Eve story, for example. Now, modern theologians, the ones worth listening to anyway, have done an excellent job giving a very subtle explanation for why the stories of creation in Genesis are not necessarily contradicting the current scientific view. Ken Miller, who you mentioned, would be a good example. Here's the problem. That's ad hoc. That's, there was a previous understanding of what Genesis meant, and that understanding was changed in order to better fit the current scientific view. That means that is what ad hoc means after the fact, I think. I think that's what ad hoc means. I'll look it up. No, post hoc. Anyway, I know I'm using the term correctly from a logical point of view if I'm not necessarily translating it correctly. These justifications that are just intended to make it unfalsifiable, they don't give any positive evidence for it. And they actually end up, the necessity of using them makes the religion look weaker. Clear and unambiguous, not lending itself to schisms and inquisitions. In other words, if the text is really describing a revelation of God, then it should be reasonable to hope that the church founded on that text would not be splitting off into factions and arguing about rival interpretations of the text. Here's something that I see a lot of in modern religion that I would hope not to see. There's two of them, really. Pseudo-miracles, to use the term Fighting Atheist gives. He has a good video that gets into some of this stuff. And anecdotes. I beg your pardon. By pseudo-miracles, I'm talking about miracles that are not persuasive to someone who analyzes them critically. If it's a miracle, if God is going to give us a miracle, and Scripture of the monotheisms that we have around us today has instructed that the purpose of the miracles that it describes were to convey to the masses that Jesus Christ, for example, but it could have been anybody, was legitimate. when I say it could have been anybody, I just mean that I'm not trying to pick on Christianity. Just using it as an example because again, it's what I'm familiar with. Um, um, that and a reliance on anecdotes. People, when I talk to people about, when they try to tell me why I should believe in their religion, they talk about their personal experiences, and some of them even describe a personal story of a miracle that, admittedly, listening to the story, I sure can't think of an alternate explanation. Sometimes, though, I can. Sometimes I can't, but even when I can't, it's not persuasive, and here's why. There is a fundamental problem with all anecdotes. They are a claim about a memory, about a perception of an event. I have no independent access to the event itself as the listener to the anecdote. The claim could be false. You could be misleading it. You could be, and there's varying degrees of malfeasance in that. You could be deceiving yourself, really, as much as you're deceiving me. You could be just editing details out that don't quite fit the narrative, or exaggerating here and there details that enhance the narrative. Of a memory. Memory is very fallible. Witnesses are, it seems like with every new psychological study that's pertinent to witness testimony loses credibility in courts of law and in police investigations, because witnesses are notoriously terrible. Ask any detective, I'm sure they tell you, witnesses are awful. And perception. How do I know that you are actually being critical while the supposed event was taking place? How do I know that you were, even assuming you were in your right mind, perception is very fallible, and there are all sorts of optical illusions you can look up to demonstrate that fact to you. And there's a really cool article on crack.com that I'll link down in the bottom bar that talks specifically about ghosts. It's not getting into this whole theistic thing, but it pertains to the issue of anecdotes generally. Some things that would be really good to see that, interestingly, are sort of claimed to exist, but don't actually seem to exist. Clear prophecies that could not be reasonably accused of contrivance. If there was something that I could, sitting here today, so many thousands of years later, could look at and evaluate and actually come to a reasonable... the whole purpose of having these prophecies is supposed to be to impress us that it's true, that the overall religion is true in the first place. So either the prophecies that took place thousands of years ago should still have persuasive power to me today. In other words, that is, not if I take it for granted that it's true it should have persuasive power, but that I should be able to actually feel confident that it's true from within the scope of the evidence available to me today. That's not the case with any of the prophecies in the Bible. I'm not going to get into the details about that now. If I'm forced to, I will. It would make this video, which is already way too long. We're at over 13 minutes on the recording, and that's way too long. It's going to be a multi-parter again, no matter what I do. Or these prophecies should be continuing to appear. If prophecy is meant to impress the truth of the religion on us, then either they should be verifiable today, as I mentioned earlier, or they should keep coming, because it doesn't seem reasonable to assume that God is being particular and favoring one period of time over another. In other words, how come these guys way back when got to see the real deal, but we have to just kind of figure it out for ourselves? That doesn't sound very God-ish, you know what I mean?